I received the card 2 weeks ago. It came in a plain white envelope with my office address typed on the front, no return label, and a single postage stamp from Bend, Oregon. I knew what it was before I opened it. I could tell by the weight, the rigidity, the particular way the laminate caught the light when I held it up to my desk lamp. It was the same size as the original, the same thickness, the same clean, unadorned formatting. But where the first card had ended after the 7th line, this one continued. There was an 8th rule now, and I think that is why I am finally ready to tell this story. My name is Cal Merritt. I am 37 years old. For 3 seasons, I worked as a backcountry ranger at the Ochoko Ridge Station in the Ochoko National Forest, about 34 miles north of Prineville, in central Oregon. It is not there anymore, at least not as a staffed post. The Forest Service consolidated the district a few years after I left, and now the building sits empty for most of the year, used only as a supply cache during fire season. But when I lived there, it was a working station. 1 building, a radio room, a kitchen barely wide enough for 2 people, a covered porch that faced east toward the Ponderosa Pine Ridge, and a gravel lot where I parked the patrol truck. I loved it there. I want to say that first, because everything that came after was built on that love. I took the posting because my life had gone sideways. A divorce I had not seen coming. A job in Portland that had slowly tightened around me like a belt. I needed quiet. I needed a place where the days were shaped by weather and maintenance checks instead of meetings. The Ochoko gave me that. The mornings were cold even in July, the air thin and smelling of pine resin and dry dust. I would wake before dawn, make coffee in the little station kitchen, and stand on the porch with my mug while the sky turned from charcoal to a pale, burning orange above the ridge. Those were good mornings. I want you to understand that. The forest was not frightening then. It was beautiful, and it was lonely, and it gave me back a sense of order I had lost. I arrived in late April, during the thaw. The previous ranger, a man named Hendricks, had already cleared out, and the district sent a supervisor named Doris to help me settle in. She was in her early 60s, compact and weathered, with gray hair she kept tied back under a Forest Service ball cap. She spoke in short sentences. She showed me the generator, the water pump, the propane heater, the radio schedule. She walked me through the patrol routes, the Mercer Creek trailhead, the fire road to the south, the service road to the north. She showed me where the trail cameras were mounted and how to pull the SD cards. She made me repeat the radio call signs until I had them memorized. Then, on my 3rd day, just before she left to drive back to Prineville, she reached into her jacket and handed me a laminated card. It was about the size of an index card, sealed in thick, stiff plastic with rounded corners. The text was printed in a plain, unremarkable font, centered on the card. There were 7 lines. No header, no explanation, no Forest Service logo, just 7 sentences that read like operational notes someone had typed up in a hurry. Rule 1. If the station radio activates between 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock a.m., log the time, but do not respond. Wait for dispatch to call during normal hours. Rule 2. The storage shed behind the station is not part of your patrol route. Do not approach it after sunset. If the padlock is open in the morning, call the district office before touching anything. Rule 3. If you find a trail marker on the Mercer Creek Trail that is facing the wrong direction, do not correct it. Return to the station and note the date and location in the logbook. Rule 4. If a visitor at the trailhead asks you how far it is to the Ridgeback Spur, tell them the trail is closed and the spur does not appear on current maps. Do not give them directions of any kind, even to redirect them. Rule 5. If the porch thermometer drops more than 20 degrees in under an hour after sunset, bring the welcome sign inside and stay indoors until morning. Rule 6. If you hear someone call your name from outside the station at night, do not answer, and do not open the door. If it continues, turn on every interior light and sit in the kitchen until it stops. Rule 7. If a found person report involves someone who was missing for more than 3 days on or near the Ridgeback Spur closure, complete your standard report, but do not ask them where they were. Write location undisclosed by subject and close the file. I read them twice while Doris watched me. Then I looked up and asked her what they were for. She zipped her jacket and glanced toward the tree line. "They're the rules for this station," she said. "They don't get explained. They just get followed." I smiled. I thought it was a joke, or maybe some kind of local tradition, the way old fire towers sometimes had superstitions about not whistling at night, or always leaving a light on for the next watch. I pinned the card to the wall beside the radio with a thumbtack, right above the frequency cheat sheet. Doris shook my hand, told me to check in every Tuesday and Thursday, and drove away down the gravel road. I stood on the porch and watched her truck disappear into the dust. I did not know it then, but I would never see her again in person. Our communication after that was entirely by radio, and even then, she kept it brief, professional, distant in a way that I first mistook for indifference. I did not look at the card again for almost a week. The station kept me busy. There were trail reports to file, weather data to record, a section of fence along the north boundary that needed repair. The Mercer Creek Trail was open for the season, and on weekends, I would drive down to the trailhead to check the sign-in box, restock the map box, and pick up trash. The hikers were friendly. The days were long and physical. I fell asleep early, woke up early, and felt my shoulders loosen for the first time in years. The forest was generous. It gave me space. It gave me silence that felt restorative rather than empty. I did not understand the first rule until my third night alone. I had been reading in the radio room, an old paperback I had found in the station's limited library, something about the geology of the Cascade Range. The station radio was a heavy, old-fashioned unit, a Kenwood that hummed with a faint warmth even when silent. I liked the sound of it. It was company. At 2:17 a.m., according to the wall clock, it activated. It did not crackle. There was no voice, no static, just a tone. A single, flat, unwavering note that filled the small room like water filling a glass. It was not loud, but it was penetrating. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, not just the speaker. I remember setting my book down and staring at the radio. My hand moved toward the handset out of pure instinct. 3 years of habit told me that when a radio opens, you answer it. That is what you do. You identify your station, and you ask for the caller's information. My fingers touched the plastic. Then I looked up and saw the card on the wall. Rule 1. I pulled my hand back. I sat in the chair. The tone continued without variation, without pause, without any modulation that suggested a human origin. It was not Morse code. It was not a malfunction. It was simply a presence, a signal occupying the channel, because it had been told to occupy the channel. I checked the clock. 2:23 a.m. I checked the frequency. It was our primary channel, the one we used for district check-ins. I sat there and listened to it. The tone did not change. It did not speed up or slow down. It simply held. I want to tell you that I was frightened in that moment, but I was not. I was confused. I was professionally irritated. A part of me wanted to key the mic and ask whoever was out there to identify themselves, to explain why they were tying up the frequency with a noise that served no purpose. But I did not. I sat there. The tone continued. At 2:45 a.m., I made a cup of instant coffee in the kitchen, and when I returned, the tone was still there. At 2:58 a.m., I was sitting directly in front of the radio, watching the second hand on the clock. At 2:59 a.m., the tone stopped. It did not fade. It did not break into static. It simply ceased, as if someone had flipped a switch. The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear the blood moving in my ears. I sat there for another 10 minutes, waiting for it to resume. It did not. At 3:15 a.m., I logged the activation in the station logbook. Time of event, 0217. Duration, 42 minutes. Nature of transmission, continuous tone. Response, none, per station protocol. In the morning, I called it in during the regular district check. Doris answered. I read her the log entry. There was a long pause on the line, just the faint hiss of the repeater. Then she said, "Good, that's logged." "Do you know what it is?" I asked. "Doesn't matter what it is," she said. "Matters that you didn't answer." I should have pushed her. I know that now. But the day was bright, and the air was warm, and there were downed branches to clear from the Mercer Creek Trail after a windstorm. I let it go. I told myself it was a telemetry test, or a stuck mic on a remote unit somewhere in the district, or some atmospheric anomaly bouncing off the ionosphere. I told myself a lot of things that spring. The forest makes it easy to believe in reasonable explanations during the day. The second rule revealed itself a week later. We had a storm system move through. Nothing severe. Just a long evening of rain that turned the service road to mud and drummed against the station's metal roof with a sound like distant applause. I slept well during storms. The noise filled the station and made it feel smaller, more enclosed, safer. In the morning, the sky was clearing, and I decided to walk the perimeter before breakfast, checking for any damage to the weather station or the propane line. The storage shed sat about 30 yards behind the station, a small, windowless structure with a corrugated metal roof and a heavy steel door. I rarely used it. It held seasonal equipment, old fencing wire, spare trail markers, things that belonged to the district rather than to me. As I approached, I saw that the padlock was hanging open. It was not broken. The shackle was simply disengaged from the hasp, dangling by its body like a question mark. The door was ajar by perhaps 2 inches. I stopped walking. I was still in my morning boots, my coffee thermos in my hand. And I remember very clearly the way the steam from the thermos lid rose in the cold morning air while I stood there looking at that open lock. I should have been concerned about theft or bears or vandals. But the first thing I thought of was the card on the radio room wall. Rule 2. Do not approach it after sunset. Well, it was morning. The sun was up. I took a step closer. Through the gap in the door, I could see a sliver of the interior. A wooden shelf, a stack of cardboard boxes, the handle of a shovel. Ordinary things. The ordinariness of it was almost magnetic. I wanted to push the door open and see if anything was out of place, if anything was missing. My hand was on the door when I stopped. I called the district office instead. I used the landline, not the radio. I spoke to a dispatcher named Gable, a man I had never met. I told him the padlock on the storage shed was open and the door was ajar. I told him I had not touched anything. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Stay away from the shed, Ranger Merritt. Someone will be out." It took them 2 days to send someone. A maintenance crew in a white truck arrived on a Thursday afternoon. They did not ask me any questions. They simply walked to the shed, closed the door, replaced the padlock with a new one, and left. I watched them from the porch. One of the men, a heavy-set guy with a beard, paused before getting back in the truck and looked at the tree line behind the shed for a long moment. Then he got in, and they drove away. That night, I did something I had not done before. I pulled out the old logbooks. The station kept them in a metal cabinet in the radio room, going back to the 70s. They were cloth-bound, heavy books with yellowed pages and the faint smell of mildew and dust. I started with the most recent and worked backward, looking for any mention of the storage shed. I found 2 entries, one from 4 years prior, logged by a ranger named Vance. 700 hours. Storage shed padlock found open. No signs of forced entry. Interior undisturbed. Called district. Did not enter. And one from 11 years prior, logged by someone with initials I could not quite read. 600 hours. Shed lock open. Door cracked. District notified. Did not approach. I sat with those books in my lap for a long time. The phrase "did not enter" and "did not approach" bothered me. Not because they were unusual, but because they were so deliberate. They were the words of people who had wanted to enter, who had wanted to approach, and who had stopped themselves. Like me, standing in the morning steam with my hand on the door. I did not understand the 3rd rule until I had already broken it in my mind. It was late May. The snow had cleared from the upper elevations, and the Mercer Creek Trail was seeing steady use. I hiked it twice a week as part of my patrol, checking for erosion, checking the markers, making sure the creek crossings were still passable. The markers were standard Forest Service posts, brown fiberglass with the trail number and directional arrow embossed in white. They were set in concrete at major junctions and switchbacks. They did not move easily. I found the reversed marker on a Tuesday morning, about 2.5 miles from the trailhead, at a switchback where the trail turned north toward the ridge. The post was facing the wrong way. Its arrow pointed back towards the trailhead, back down the path I had just climbed. I stopped and looked at it for a long time. The ground around the base was undisturbed. The concrete footing was solid, the soil packed and dry. There were no footprints, no tool marks, no indication that anyone had dug it up and turned it around. It was simply facing the wrong direction, as if it had grown that way. I reached out to turn it. My hands were on the fiberglass. Then I remembered the card. Rule 3, do not correct it. I let go. I stepped back. I took out my notebook and wrote down the date, the time, the GPS coordinates from my handheld unit, and a brief description. Then I turned around and hiked back to the station. I did not finish my patrol. I told myself I would return the next day and see if it was still reversed. If it was, I would call it in as vandalism. That evening, the forest went silent. I was on the porch after dinner, reading the same geology paperback, when I realized I could not hear anything. No birds, no insects, no wind in the ponderosa needles. The silence was not the silence of an empty room. It was the silence of a held breath. I set my book down and sat very still. I could hear my own breathing. I could hear the pages of the book settling against the arm of the chair. But the forest itself had stopped producing sound. It was as if the trees were listening to something I could not hear and had agreed to make no noise of their own. I sat there for an hour. I did not go inside. I think I was waiting for the silence to break, for an owl to call or a branch to snap or a nighthawk to pass overhead. Nothing happened. The light faded from orange to purple to a deep, star-scattered black. The air grew cold. Eventually, I went inside and locked the door. I slept poorly, waking every hour to listen to the nothing outside my window. At dawn, I drove to the trailhead and hiked back to the switchback. The marker was facing the correct direction. The arrow pointed north, up the trail, exactly as it should have. The ground around it was still undisturbed. I touched the fiberglass. It was cold with morning dew. I stood there for a while, looking up at the ridge, and I felt something shift in my understanding of the station. The rules were not superstitions. They were responses. Someone had written them because something had happened more than once, and the writing was an attempt to make a pattern out of events that did not otherwise make sense. I started checking the rulebook every morning after that. I would wake up, make coffee, and stand in the radio room with my mug, reading the 7 lines while the sun came through the east window. I did not know what I was looking for. Maybe I thought the text would change overnight. Maybe I was just trying to memorize them, to make them a part of my reflexes so that I would not have to think when the moment came. Because by then, I understood that the moments would keep coming. The 4th rule was the one that made me afraid for someone else. It was a Saturday in June. I had driven down to the Mercer Creek trailhead to empty the trash cans and refill the brochure box. A silver sedan pulled into the lot while I was working, and a couple got out, a man and a woman in their 30s, wearing new-looking boots and carrying an old topo map in a plastic sleeve. They were cheerful. They asked me about water sources along the trail, about the condition of the upper ridge, about camping restrictions. I answered their questions. Then the man unfolded his map and pointed to a dashed line that ran east from the main trail, climbing toward a high saddle. "How far is it from here to the Ridgeback Spur?" he asked. "The map shows it connecting to the main trail about 4 miles in." I looked at the map. It was an older printing, pre-1989, and it did show the spur. I had seen the closure on my own patrol maps. The Ridgeback Spur had been officially decommissioned decades ago, the trail erased from current USGS quads and Forest Service publications. The gate at the trail junction was locked, and the area beyond was marked with orange closure signs. I did not know why it was closed. It was simply listed as unsafe terrain in the district files, a vague designation that covered a lot of ground in backcountry management. "The Ridgeback Spur is closed," I said. "It doesn't appear on current maps. I can't give you directions to it." The man laughed. "We hiked part of it 2 days ago," he said. "Came in from the east side. It's a little overgrown, but it's fine. We just wanted to do the full loop from this side." Something cold moved through my chest. "The trail is closed," I repeated. "I can't give you directions of any kind." The woman frowned. "Even to redirect us? We're not asking you to guide us. Just point us towards the main trail, up to the ridge." I looked at the card in my mind. Rule 4. Do not give them directions of any kind, even to redirect them. "I can't help you with that trail," I said. "The Mercer Creek Trail is open for another 6 miles north. That's the only route I can discuss." They were annoyed. The man folded his map with a sharp snap, and the woman said something under her breath about unhelpful rangers. They got back in their car and drove away. I watched them go. I wrote down their license plate in my notebook, telling myself it was standard procedure to log visitor interactions. 3 days later, a search and rescue activation went out for the ridge area east of Mercer Creek. A silver sedan had been found abandoned at an unofficial pull-off near the old spur access. They found the couple on the 2nd day of the search. They were alive, physically uninjured, but they were found sitting on the ground near the locked closure gate, staring at the orange signs as if they had never seen them before. They could not account for the previous 48 hours. They remembered hiking toward the spur. They remembered the forest getting quiet. And then they remembered waking up, fully dressed, their packs still on, 2 days later, with no memory of where they had been or what they had done. The SAR team brought them out. I heard about it on the district radio net. I did not process the report myself, but I saw the incident number in the weekly summary. The narrative ended with the phrase, "Subjects disoriented but stable. No evidence of foul play." I stood in the radio room that evening and looked at Rule 4 until I had memorized every word. Do not give them directions of any kind. I understood then that the rule was not about keeping people away from a dangerous trail. It was about keeping the trail from knowing you were interested in it. It was about not forming a connection, not creating a line of intention between a human question and whatever existed at the other end of the answer. I did not sleep well for a week after that. I kept thinking about the man's laugh, the way he had said they hiked part of it 2 days ago. I kept thinking about how close I had come to pointing towards the ridge, to saying it's about 4 miles that way. I had almost drawn a map with my finger. And I did not know what would have happened to me if I had. The 5th rule was the one that made me feel watched. It was late September of my first season. The days were still warm, but the nights had turned sharp, and the station heater was running in the evenings for the first time since spring. I had developed a routine. After dinner, I would sit on the porch with a mug of tea and read until the light failed. The porch had a thermometer mounted on the north post, an old dial-style unit with a metal bracket, the kind you find at hardware stores in ranching towns. I checked it out of habit, the way some people check their watches. That evening, the sun went down at about 7:15. At 7:20, I glanced at the thermometer. It read 48 degrees, normal for the elevation. I went back to my book. At 7:40, I looked up again. The thermometer read 26 degrees. I stared at it. I stood up and walked over to it. The dial had not stuck. The needle rested firmly on 26. I checked my watch. 20 minutes. A 22-degree drop in 20 minutes, on a clear night with no wind, no cloud cover, no weather system moving through. The air did not feel 26 degrees. It felt like 48. But the thermometer insisted. I remembered Rule 5. If the porch thermometer drops more than 20 degrees in under an hour after sunset, bring the welcome sign inside and stay indoors until morning. The welcome sign was a small wooden plank that hung from a nail beside the door. It said Ochoco Ridge Station in faded paint. It had been there when I arrived. I unhooked it, carried it inside, and set it against the kitchen wall. Then I locked the porch door, locked the front door, and sat down at the kitchen table with every interior light turned on. The kitchen was at the center of the station, no windows, just a single vent fan and the hum of the refrigerator. I sat there with my tea, and I listened. At some point, I realized I could not hear the weather station mast creaking. I could not hear the generator's distant purr. The station seemed to have been wrapped in felt. I sat in my chair and did not move. I thought about the welcome sign leaning against the wall behind me. I thought about the thermometer on the porch, reading a temperature that did not match the air. I thought about what it meant for the forest to have a localized weather event that affected only a 6-foot radius around my front steps. At 4 in the morning, I checked the indoor-outdoor thermometer I kept on the kitchen windowsill. The outdoor sensor read 49 degrees. The drop had reversed itself. I waited until full light before I opened the front door. The porch was empty. The thermometer read 49 degrees. The gravel was undisturbed. But when I turned around to pick up the welcome sign and rehang it, I saw the handprint. It was on the face of the sign, a faint impression in what looked like condensation or frost, though the sign had been inside all night. 5 fingers, slightly too long, the palm narrow. It was not my hand. I held my own palm up to it, and my fingers fell short of the print by nearly an inch. I stood in the morning light with the sign in my hands, and I felt the first true coil of fear settle into my stomach. Not the fear of an accident or a storm or a medical emergency. The fear of something that had been close enough to touch the sign while I sat in the kitchen with the lights on. Something that had left a mark. I put the sign back on its nail. I did not wash the print off. It faded on its own by noon. I called in a routine weather anomaly to the district, describing the temperature fluctuation without mentioning the handprint. The dispatcher logged it. No one asked follow-up questions. By then, I had started checking the rulebook every morning, and I had started sleeping with the kitchen light on. I need to tell you about the voicemail before I tell you about Rule 6. It came in the middle of my second season. My ex-wife, Elena, left me a message on a Tuesday afternoon while I was out on patrol. I did not get cell service at the station, but there was a landline for district business, and she had called that number. She said she had seen a photo of me in a Forest Service newsletter, something about seasonal hiring, and she wanted to know if I was doing okay. She said she was sorry she had not reached out sooner. She said she missed me sometimes, in the way you miss a place you used to live. She said she hoped the mountains were doing me good. Her voice on the recording was careful, kind, the way it had been at the very beginning, before we learned how to hurt each other. I played the message twice. Then I saved it. I sat in the radio room that evening and listened to the static between check-ins, and I felt a loneliness so complete that it seemed to have weight. I missed her. Not the marriage, not the last year of arguments, but the person I had believed she was when I first loved her. The forest had given me peace, but it had not given me company. I went to bed early. That night, I heard my name from beyond the tree line. Cal? It was her voice, exactly her cadence, the slight lift at the end of the single syllable, the way she had always said it when she was waking me up or calling me in from the porch. I was in bed, in the dark, and the window was open 6 inches for ventilation. The voice came from the northwest, toward the storage shed, maybe 50 yards out. Cal. I sat up. My heart was hammering, but not with fear. Not yet. With a terrible, desperate hope. I told myself she had come to surprise me, that she had driven up from Portland, that she was standing in the trees with a flashlight and a coat against the cold. I actually swung my legs out of bed. I actually reached for my boots. Then I saw the card in my mind. Rule 6. If you hear someone call your name from outside the station at night, do not answer, and do not open the door. I froze. The voice came again, from a different direction. Northeast now. Closer. Cal, it's cold out here. It was her voice. It was her exact voice, but Elena did not know where the station was. I had never told her the name of the ridge, the road, the forest. She would have had to call the district office, file a request, drive 4 hours on mountain roads. And she would not have stood in the dark, calling my name like a character in a dream. She would have knocked. She would have used the porch light. I did not answer. I did not open the door. I walked to the kitchen in the dark, and I turned on every light. The overhead fixture, the stove light, the radio room light, the bathroom light. The station glowed like a lantern in the middle of the forest. I sat at the kitchen table in my t-shirt and boxers, my hands wrapped around a cold coffee mug, and I listened. The voice called twice more. Once from the south, near the propane tank. Once from directly in front of the station, close enough that I could have opened the door and stepped into her arms. Each time, it was perfect. Each time, it was wrong. Because between the calls, there was no sound of movement, no footsteps in the gravel, no branch breaking under weight. Just the voice, repositioning itself in the dark without traveling through the space between. It stopped at 3:47 a.m., I know, because I was staring at the kitchen clock, watching the minute hand jerk forward in its small, mechanical jumps. The last call was simply my name, spoken softly, with a note of sadness that made me want to weep. Then nothing. I sat in the lit kitchen until the sun came up. I did not go to the window. I did not look outside. In the morning, the gravel was undisturbed. There were no footprints. There was no car in the lot. I checked the landline. There was no record of Elena's call from the previous day. I mean, the call had happened. I had saved the message. But the district phone log showed no incoming call from her number, or from any number with a Portland area code. I played her message again. It sounded exactly the same. Her voice, kind and distant, hoping the mountains were doing me good. I sat on the porch that afternoon and looked at the tree line. I understood that the forest had listened to me. It had heard me playing that message, feeling my loneliness. And it had offered me the one thing that might make me open the door. It had offered me the sound of love. And it had done it perfectly. That was the worst part. It was not a grotesque imitation. It was flawless. It was the voice of the person I had lost, speaking my name in the dark with exactly the right amount of hope and regret. I never played that message again. I deleted it that evening. And I started sleeping with the kitchen light on, and the radio room light, and the bathroom light. My electric bill must have been enormous. I did not care. The seventh rule was the one that made me understand I was not the first. It happened in my third and final season. A solo hiker had been reported missing by his sister when he failed to return from a 4-day loop in the backcountry. The search area included the upper reaches of the Mercer Creek drainage and the closed Ridgeback Spur closure. I was not on the SAR team, but I assisted with logistics at the station, relaying radio traffic, keeping the log, preparing meals for the teams when they returned to the trailhead. The hiker had been missing for 4 days when they found him. He walked out on his own. I was on the porch at dawn, drinking coffee, when I saw him coming down the service road. He was wearing a pack, dirty but intact. He moved with a steady, unhurried pace, the way a man walks when he knows exactly where he is going. I set my mug down and went to meet him. He was in his 50s, lean, with gray stubble and clear eyes. He did not look dehydrated. He did not look injured. He looked like someone who had finished a pleasant day hike. I brought him inside. I gave him water. I called the SAR incident commander on the radio and told them the subject had self-rescued. The man sat at my kitchen table and drank his water in small, measured sips. I started to ask him the standard questions. Where had he been? What route had he taken? Did he need medical attention? He looked at me and smiled. It was a calm, almost paternal smile. I don't need to tell you where I was, he said. You know the rules. I felt the blood leave my face. I set down my pen. What rules? The ones on the card, he said. The ones she gave you. The old woman, Doris. I did not ask how he knew Doris's name. I did not ask how he knew about the card. I completed the standard found person report. In the box for location found, I wrote, location undisclosed by subject. I wrote that he was alert and oriented. I wrote that he refused medical evaluation. I closed the file. When I looked up from the paperwork, he was holding out his hand. I shook it. His grip was dry and warm. "You have good rules here," he said. Then he shouldered his pack and walked out to the waiting SAR vehicle. I watched him through the window. He did not look back at the station. He did not look at the tree line. He got in the truck and was driven away. I stood in the radio room for a long time after that, looking at the 7 rules on the wall. I thought about the man. I thought about his clear eyes and his unhurried walk. I thought about how he had not looked lost. He had looked like a delivery man who had finally reached his destination and was now heading home. I found out later, much later, that there were other reports, other found person cases in the district files, going back decades, involving subjects who had been missing for exactly 3 days or more in the Ridgeback Spur area. The narratives were all similar. Subjects found calm, subjects unable or unwilling to describe their location during the missing period, subjects making statements that seemed slightly off, slightly knowing, slightly too comfortable with their own inexplicable survival. The reports were scattered across different ranger districts, different forests, different decades. But the pattern was there if you knew to look for it. I looked for it. I spent 3 nights in the radio room, going through old files I had pulled from the district archive during a routine supply run. I should not have taken them. I did anyway. I spread them on the kitchen table and read them by the light I still left on at night. And I found the phrase, again and again, in the handwriting of rangers I had never met. Logged, did not engage. It appeared in margin notes, in incident summaries, in personal logbooks that had been donated to the station library. It was a code, a shorthand, a way of saying something happened, and I followed the rules, and I am still here to write about it. I understood then that the rules were not a list of superstitions. They were a treaty, a set of terms negotiated by people who had learned, through loss or through luck, that the forest had its own procedures, its own protocols. And as long as we followed ours, it followed some version of its own. We did not answer the radio after midnight. We did not enter the shed after dark. We did not correct the markers. We did not give directions to the spur. We brought the sign inside when the temperature lied. We did not answer our names. We did not ask the returned where they had been. In exchange, we were allowed to live in the station. We were allowed to walk the trails. We were allowed to wake up in the morning and make coffee and watch the sun come over the ridge. It was not friendship. It was not peace. It was an armistice. And I had followed it for 3 seasons without fully understanding what I was agreeing to. I left at the end of that 3rd season. It was my choice. The district offered me a permanent position. They offered me a transfer to a bigger station with better pay, closer to town. I took a desk job instead, in the regional office in Bend. I told my supervisor I was ready for a change. I told him I wanted to be closer to family, though I had none in the area. I told him whatever he needed to hear. What I did not tell him was that I had started dreaming about the Ridgeback Spur, that I would wake up in my apartment in Bend with the taste of pine needles in my mouth, convinced for a moment that I had walked the closed trail in my sleep, that I had started avoiding the windows after dark, even on the third floor, because I was not sure if the rules applied only to the forest, or if they followed the people who had learned them. I did not go back to Ochoco Ridge, not for 5 years, not until I heard that Doris had retired. I sent her a card. It was a simple thing, a thank you note for her training, written in the flat language of professional gratitude. She did not reply. I did not expect her to. Then, 2 weeks ago, the envelope arrived at my office. No return address, a Bend postmark. Inside, the laminated card. It had all 7 rules, identical, word for word. But below the 7th rule, in the same plain font, was a new line. Rule 8. If you return to the station for any reason, do not stay past dark on the first night. I have read that line perhaps 100 times since it arrived. I have held the card up to the light, looking for watermarks. I have compared the laminate to the original I still keep in my desk drawer. They are identical. The printing is identical. The weight is identical. And I do not know who sent it. Doris, if she chose to contact me, would have used her own voice. She would have called. She would have said, "Merritt, it's Doris." She would not have sent an anonymous card with an 8th rule. And yet, the card knows things. It knows I have been thinking about going back. It knows I have been driving up the highway on weekends, telling myself I am just passing through, just seeing the country, just getting out of the city. It knows I have been parking at the turnoff for the service road and sitting in my car, looking at the ridge through binoculars, wondering if the station still has my handprint on its doorknob, my coffee ring on its counter, my ghost in its radio room. I do not know if the 8th rule is a warning or a threat. I do not know if it was written by the Forest Service, by Doris, by whatever writes the rules when no one is looking. I only know that it is specific. It does not say, "Do not return." It says, "Do not stay past dark on the first night," which implies that a return is permitted. It implies that the forest remembers me and that it has conditions for my homecoming. I keep the card face down in my desk drawer. I have not driven to the turnoff since it arrived. I tell myself I am being careful. I tell myself I am being smart. But the truth is that I am afraid, and not in the way I was afraid when I sat in the kitchen with the lights on. I am afraid because the rules have always been accurate. They have always described something real. And if there is now a rule about me returning, then something has changed. The treaty has been amended, and I do not know what I did or what the forest did to require a new term. I still miss it. I want to say that too. I miss the mornings on the porch with the coffee steaming in the cold air. I miss the sound of the patrol truck on wet gravel. I miss the smell of old logbooks and the particular green of the ponderosa needles in June. I miss the feeling of being useful in a place that did not care about my divorce or my failures. A place that only asked me to show up, to check the trails, to log the weather, and to follow the rules. I miss the forest in a way you miss a person who is kind to you before you learned their secrets. Sometimes, late at night, I take the card out and I read all 8 rules in order. I read them like a prayer, or like a contract. And I wonder about the rangers who came before me, the ones who wrote logged, did not engage in the margins of their reports. I wonder if they are still out there somewhere, following rules I have not learned yet. I wonder if they are sitting in kitchens with the lights on, listening to voices they do not answer. I wonder if they received their own 8th rules, their own amendments, their own quiet warnings that the agreement was shifting. I do not know if I will go back. I think about it more often now. The days are getting shorter. The nights are getting colder. And there is a station on a ridge in central Oregon where a welcome sign hangs beside a door, where a radio sits silent, except between 2 and 3 in the morning, where a storage shed waits with its padlock closed, where a trail marker turns itself around when no one is looking, and where the temperature sometimes drops 20 degrees in 20 minutes for no meteorological reason. The station is still there. The forest is still there. And the rules, I assume, are still being followed by whoever is sitting in the kitchen with the lights on, waiting for the silence to end. But I hope, if I do go back, that I remember to leave before dark, because the 8th rule was not written to protect the forest from me. I am beginning to understand that it was written to protect me from what happens after the forest has had time to remember my name. I still keep my boots by the door. I still wake up sometimes at 2:17 a.m., listening for a tone that does not come. I still know the frequency by heart. And some nights, when the wind is right, I can smell the pine resin from 5 years ago, carried across the miles, like a voice calling from just beyond the tree line, saying my name in a way that sounds almost like welcome, almost like warning, almost like home. I do not answer, but I have not thrown the card away.